Rob,
Thank you, John. A pleasure to be here with you.
thank you. Well, Rob said he's not feeling 100% today, but we're going to go as far as we can, as well, much as we can. And um, I really appreciate your being here. This topic is, of course, who's not interested in this? I mean, who doesn't think about what happens after we leave this world? Maybe what was going on before we came here. Of course, it's crucial to all of our lives. And of course, we'd like to know more about that. And if there's any way also that you can relate to this topic in terms of the Course in Miracles, that'd be appreciated. But also, let's begin with, or we usually begin with something like that. Why in the world did you get interested in this topic? And how did you start proceeding on this road? And kind of how did you start writing books and all that? Because the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Believe it or not, I was actually in the corporate world for many years until the age of 40, which was longer ago than I would care to mention. And was doing corporate marketing and communications, did not like this at all. Um, and had this nagging sense that I had come to Earth to do something else, but I didn't know what it was. And then back in 2003, things really came to a head. And I had what you could call an existential crisis about my life. I knew that I could not go on in the corporate world, but I had no idea what to do with myself. And so the universe basically staged an intervention. And within just a few weeks, three very, very important things happened in my life. The first was I went to see a psychic medium. This is not something I had ever done before. Mediumship is not part of my background. I wasn't even sure if I believed in mediumship, but I was in the middle of this crisis and I didn't know what else to do. So I wanted to try something new and different. So I go into this session with the medium, and the first thing she says to me is, "Your spirit guides are here." And I said, "What is a spirit guide?" I mean, I'd never even heard the term before. So she explained that. And then she said, "Your guides would like to speak directly with you." She started to channel them. And the first thing they said to me was, "You planned your life, including your biggest challenges, before you were born." And I said, "Well, why in the world would I do that?" And they said, "You did this for purposes of spiritual growth." Then it got really interesting because they launched into this very long monologue in which they went through all of my major challenges one by one and told me why I had planned them. And what was really compelling about this is that they knew what all of my challenges had been without me saying anything about myself, nor had I told the medium anything prior to the session. So I went into this not even sure if I believed in mediumship. And then I find myself talking to beings who knew literally everything about me without me saying a word. That blew my mind wide open. And the fact that they knew everything about me made me very open to this idea they were putting forward that I had planned my life. Then, within just a couple of weeks of that session, I was introduced to a woman who has the ability to go into trance and channel her soul, her higher self. So I had the amazing opportunity to spend about 15 hours dialoguing with this woman's higher self. And her soul told me in detail how we plan our lives before we come here, why we plan big challenges for ourselves, which challenges had been discussed for her, which ones had been chosen and why, which ones had not been chosen and why not. And this 15 hours of channeled material about pre-birth planning really served as a foundation for the three books I wanted to write. And then the most important thing of all, just a few weeks after these channelings, I had a spiritually transformative experience, an STE, in which I was doing nothing more than walking down the sidewalk in the middle of the afternoon. And all of a sudden, I was overcome by pure, overwhelming, unconditional love for every person I saw. And, I call it unconditional love, pure, overwhelming, because those are some of the words that get closest to it. But there really are no words that even begin to describe what this love was like. I could also call it divine love or transcendent love. It was not a human love. It was not personal in any way. The people I saw as I was walking, were all strangers to me. But every time I saw another person, this feeling of the most pure, overwhelming, unconditional love for that person washed over me. Now, I had never heard of anything like this or read about anything like this, but I understood as this was happening. Uh, you could say that I was caused to know. I was caused to know that we as souls are made literally from the energy of unconditional love. I got the message loud and clear. What I didn't know at the time was why this was happening. That actually became clear a couple of years later. By that time, I had looked at many people's pre-birth plans for the first book, Your Soul's Plan. And what I found in every case is that the pre-birth plan was formed with complete unconditional love for every person involved. And that was true even when great challenges were being planned. It was true even when negative roles were being scripted for people. It was always based on unconditional love for every person involved. And then I realized, aha, that experience walking down the street, that was gifted to me so that when I found this result in my research, I would be certain that what I was finding was true. And this is why I can sit before you today and say with complete confidence and certainty that I believe that we as souls are made literally from the energy of unconditional love, because that was my experience walking down the street that day. So the combination of those three things, session with the medium, the woman's channeling of her soul, and this experience of divine unconditional love for all people, the combination of those three things got me to say, okay, I'll leave the corporate world. I'll try to write a book about how we plan our lives before we're born. And 3 years later, Your Soul's Plan came out.
So what was the first thing that happened by that way, in terms of your really waking up and seeing or hearing? Was it with the medium? Is that beyond that?
And
Or was
that
it
was
personal?
that was the first of the three
That was
things
the
that
first.
happened. Um, I should explain here, the session with the medium, the effect that that had on me is that it helped me to see for the first time deeper meaning and deeper purpose to the most challenging experiences I had in my life. And that was deeply healing for me. And when I saw the healing that this awareness brought, that was when I first started to think about writing a book on the subject. And then the universe nudged me a little bit more with that woman's channeling of her soul. And then it nudged me even more with that spiritually transformative experience. So it was clear to me that the universe wanted me to move in that direction.
And when did you yourself begin to do the hypnotic age regression stuff with folks?
That actually didn't start until a number of years later. So what happened is Your Soul's Plan came out at early 2007. And from the moment that book came out, I started getting emails from people all over the world,
Right.
all of whom were saying the same thing. They were saying, I want you to tell me what my pre-birth plan is.
Oh, yeah.
And for years, I wrote back and I answered every person the same way. I said,
Really?
I'm not a medium. I'm not a channel. I don't know what your pre-birth plan is. If you want to know that, work with one of the mediums in the book. But then I learned about the work of Michael Newton, the between lives, or he called it LBL, like between lives regression.
All right.
Called it a between lives soul regression, but it's the same thing. I took that training, and this has given me a way to facilitate a process in which people can find out for themselves what they planned. So it's a long session, it's about 2 hours. We start with a short past life component, but then the person leaves the past life, they cross back over to the other side, and they're taken to what is called their council of elders. Those are the very loving and wise beings who oversee your personal evolution. And when someone gets to their council, you can ask literally any question on any subject. And if it's for the highest good, they will answer you. So generally, people ask, what did I plan? Why did I make those plans? How am I doing? And how can I do better in terms of fulfilling my plan? But you can ask about any relationship, uh, personal issues of any kind, challenges of any kind, and find out the deeper meaning of why these things are happening.
One of the things that concerned me about reading your book was people who have these really difficult lives, and somehow that's a plan. It's like, especially the ones that took me back, were the ones that involved a lot of pain of some sort or another, like physical pain, for example. Like one that really got me too is I think it was in Pomona, California,
Right.
at college. The girl, a bomb went off when she was opening a mail thing or something, and that sounded horrific. And I couldn't go think, but no, I mean, why would somebody put that into their life plan? It's just, it's so deep. And a part of that, the reason I'm asking that question that way is because in terms of the Course in Miracles, there's a similar, we don't ask for suffering. We do suffer on the ego, no doubt, suffers because it's, well, stupid. I mean, it's going for power and fame and money and all that kind of stuff that it's going to run down into a ditch anyhow. That's inevitable. Just the karmic laws of the universe are going on. But why somebody would deliberately got any ideas about why would I pick such a difficult path?
Well, I have a lot to say on that particular
Okay,
question.
good.
First and foremost, I'm one of those people who picked a really difficult path with a tremendous amount of suffering in it. My mother has significant mental health issues and was very abusive to me throughout
Oh
my
dear.
childhood. Yeah. So the first 16 years of my life were extremely, extremely difficult. And that was one of the driving motivations behind doing this work. I wanted to understand if there's really a loving God out there, how did something like this happen?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Well, I will tell you, there are sort of two tracks on which I can answer this question. There's a logical analytic track, and I can talk about the five main reasons I found in my research for planning big challenges. But there's another track, which is the heart. So we could talk for hours about the five reasons for planning life challenges. And at the end of that discussion, a lot of the people here would probably say something to me like, okay, Bob, I can believe now that some souls plan mild or moderate challenges for these five reasons. But I still can't wrap my mind around the idea, for example, that a parent would plan to lose a child. The pain from that is so excruciating. I can't wrap my mind around that. And if you were to say that to me, you would be absolutely right because the mind will never comprehend that.
No.
When the ego mind makes a decision, and you're all students of the course, so you know this, it does a cost benefit analysis. What am I going to get out of this? What will it cost me? Is it going to be worth it?
Hmm.
The mind is not in charge of pre birth planning. The heart is. And the heart doesn't do a cost benefit analysis. The heart wants one thing and one thing only, and that is to love, give and receive love fully and freely. So let's say that you're back on the other side, and another soul in your soul group who you know well, who you've worked with in many past lives, and you've established a lot of trust and love with this other soul, mutual trust and mutual love. This soul comes to you and says, I'm planning a very short incarnation on earth. I'm going to pass in childhood. I want to do that for this reason and this reason and that reason. And then the soul says, would you agree to be the mother or the father who shepherds me through those few years on earth? If the heart is your operating system, and I assure you that it is, then your response is most likely yes. Yes, I love you dearly. And if this is what you want and need from me, then yes, I will be happy to play that role for you. And the grief that I will go through, though intense, I will find a way to work with that for my own expansion. That's the gist of the conversation that takes place on the other side. I'll share one more important thing here. I had a profound between the worlds experience about a year ago. And I would say about 75% of my consciousness went back to the other side, went home, so to speak. About 25% stayed in body. So I still knew who I was, where I was, but mostly I was back on the other side. And a lot of things happened while I was back there. But the one that stands out the most is that my mother was there. Now
Oh,
she's still here in a body, so presumably this was her soul I encountered. And when her soul came before me, I felt the most intense, overwhelming love for my mother that I've ever felt since coming into body.
oh,
It's far, far stronger than anything I felt since I've been in a
mm,
body.
mhm,
And I could tell that this love was mutual and that this is the nature of our relationship when we're both back on the other side. So, what happened with her, as I understand it, partly it was a karmic balancing for a big mess we made in past lives. And partly it was intended to provide me with the opportunity and the motivation to go on and do the work that I've gone on to do. I don't think I would have written a single book if that hadn't happened.
hmm. Can you go over the 5 things that you were talking about?
Yeah, so briefly, uh, one is balancing and releasing karma. That's probably the one people are most familiar with. Two is healing, which means healing unhealed energies that are carried forward from past lives. For example, in your soul's plan, there's a woman who is born completely deaf. And we go into her pre birth planning session. We hear the conversation with her spirit guide when the deafness was chosen. And we find out that in the lifetime immediately previous to this one, she had the same mother she has in this lifetime. And when she was a little girl, she heard her mother shot to death by the mother's boyfriend. She never healed from that trauma in that past life. And in fact, it actually led to suicide. So she went back to spirit with what you could call an unhealed energy of trauma, which now has to be healed. She brings that back into body energetically for the purpose of healing it. And then, in having made that decision, her guide says to her in the pre birth planning, would you like to be born deaf so that no similar trauma will happen to you again? And she
Hmm.
says, yes. So
Wow.
that's the motivation for the decision. The third reason is service to others. The fourth reason is experiencing contrast, which means experiencing not love. So basically, as I've shared with you, I had an experience in which I was shown that we are made from the energy of unconditional love. The other side is a realm of unconditional love. So if we're unconditional love and we're in a realm of unconditional love, that means we experience no contrast to ourselves, which in turn means we don't fully understand who or what we are. So by coming into body and experiencing not love, so to speak, the contrast teaches you what unconditional love really is. And that in turn gives you a more profound self knowing.
Hmm.
And then the fifth reason, this is actually a subset of number two, healing, but it's so important, I have to mention it as a separate item. And that is healing or correcting false feelings or false beliefs about oneself. The main false beliefs or feelings people have are that they are powerless, unworthy, or worthless. If you feel or believe yourself to be powerless, unworthy, or worthless, in the physical realm, what will happen is you will magnetize to yourself experiences that seem on the surface to confirm the false belief or false feeling. The world is set up that way. It's set up to mirror you back to you. And the purpose for that is so that you can learn what's in your consciousness. And if there's something there that's false or discordant, then you can set about healing it. So the world will mirror those false feelings or beliefs back to you, not as a punishment, although it might feel that way, but the intention is to call your awareness to the false belief, and then you can go about healing it.
One of my favorite principles of the 50 Miracles principles in the Course, number 7 says, miracles are everyone's right. Purification is necessary first. So we got to purify, apparently. And get the junk out of the psychic system, if you will. So you guess you're seeing a lot of that then in
You
this.
know, this particular incarnation, as I understand it, is all about purification. You could say that about any incarnation on the earth plane, but this one is really about purification because we're in the middle of an ascension process.
Hmm.
So, as I understand it, the earth has already ascended from the third dimension, or what is really called third density, into fourth density. And we're on our way to fifth density, which is a vibration of oneness consciousness and unconditional love. So in order to get to that much higher vibration, you have to purify. You have to let go of everything within your being, within your consciousness, that's of a lower vibration. False beliefs or feelings about yourself. Trauma is a big one for just about everybody. The average person, when something traumatic happens, they're so overwhelmed and so busy just dealing with that. The emotions are either repressed or suppressed, but either way, they're stuffed into the cells of the body. And that will eventually cause illness, of course. But the bigger issue in this lifetime is that you can't carry those low vibrational energies into fifth density. So what's happening now on a global scale is a purification of the entire human race. It's happening collectively, which is why the news is crazier than ever. It's happening in each individual's life, whether they know it or not. Basically, your stuff is going to come up, and what you want to do is look it square in the eye and decide whether or not you want to let it go, but don't push it back down.
So we have to make a conscious decision to actually do that. I mean, to actually say, I want to look at my crap.
Maybe
Right?
not. Maybe want is too strong a word, but be willing to.
Be
So
willing.
when it comes up, the average response is one of resistance or aversion.
Sure.
It doesn't feel good. You want to push it back down so that you can feel better. That's really not going to work at this time in this incarnation. Your soul is going to bring it back around again and again. And what I see in my work, and this comes up all the time, we do in the 2-day workshop, we do an exercise called the Divine Virtues exercise that gives people insight into the qualities they're working on in this lifetime. And they go through this process where they fill out a matrix in which they assess how each major life challenge affected them and helped them to grow in terms of unconditional love, patience, empathy, compassion, and in about 25 other virtues. I call them divine virtues. Well, what happens is when people fill out this matrix, very often they see a pattern in which something challenging happened earlier in life and they didn't learn the intended lesson. And so the same kind of challenge comes back around some years later, but it's more intense this time.
Oh,
And if they don't get the lesson then, it comes back a third time and it's more intense the third time. It just keeps going like that. And that's essentially what purification looks like. It's much easier and much faster to be willing to look at your stuff the first time it comes up, because if it's going to come back, it's usually going to be more intense.
seems like so much of this seems to happen on an unconscious basis, but then we can make conscious choices to deliberately go through some of these trials. Right?
That's very well said, and that's one of the most one of the things I'm trying to accomplish with my research into pre-birth planning. You know, you can't not lead a spiritual life. Everybody is on a spiritual path, whether they know it or not. But you can certainly be unaware of the fact that you're on a spiritual path. And so, one of the intentions of my work is to help people first realize you are on a spiritual path, and two, understand what it's all about. What is the deeper meaning and purpose of your biggest challenges? Because if you know that, then you can learn those lessons in a much more conscious and much less painful way.
Right. One of the things that interests me a lot, I'm sure it does other people too, is synchronistic events where things that you just kind of weren't thinking about or planning, and all of a sudden they seem to be happening. As like there's intention in it, there's meaning in it. You meet somebody that, my God, you just really were supposed to meet that person. And you didn't know why until you start developing a relationship. But then when you see it, it's just perfect. Like you're really in the right place.
Yeah, and isn't it the course that says, you have relationships for a reason, a season, or a lifetime?
That's right.
Yeah, so that these sorts of synchronicities that you're talking about, many times they're planned before birth. And souls who are going to be important to each other in the upcoming incarnation will actually practice pre birth ways of recognizing each other. So in Michael Newton's books, when he did the pioneering research in this field,
Right.
he found, for example, that there's a story of a man and a woman who are going to become husband and wife. And they talk about that she will wear a certain kind of dress that he'll recognize, or she'll carry a certain kind of umbrella that he will recognize subconsciously. It's a way of making these synchronicities happen. And there are a number of synchronicities that are not planned pre-birth, but they're engineered by your higher self and guides as you go along.
So that had to be engineered by, say, another person's guide too, to get the two to work together, like husband and wife kind of combination there, then,
That's exactly right. And
right?
then there's another way through which this happens, which is that when we sleep at night, we leave the physical body and go back to the other side in the astral body. And when you go back there, you meet with the other significant people in your life, including those you're going to be meeting down the road. You talk about what it is that you came here to learn and how it's going. And then you have a discussion about, do you need to make any adjustments in what you're doing so that everybody can learn what they came to learn and do what they came to do? So synchronicities will come out of those sorts of nightly conversations.
One of the things that interests me a great deal, the class that I'm teaching is called Living a Lucid Life. And as you know, the Course in Miracles says that this whole thing's a dream. So when you have a lucid dream at night, it's as though you're conscious within the dream. You're aware of the fact that you're dreaming. So what I'm talking to folks about is being conscious within this dream. I mean, the what we call the awakened dream, the day dream, the daytime dream, right? Because if you can do that, that gives you some control. It also gives you an opportunity to be happier because you can make better choices within that context. You can also avoid unconscious falls that you weren't looking out for by raising your consciousness at that level. One thing too that interests me is it interests us all. I think we're all aware maybe there's an expansion of consciousness going on. That's pretty clear. There's some fear around that. What does that mean for the world? What does that mean for my livelihood, my home? Should we be worried about these things? What can we do as a preparation for some of this stuff? I mean, we're not in the Middle East right now, but you hear what I'm saying? The
I do.
question, yeah,
Yeah, well, the Middle East is a good example of the purification that's
right.
going on right now. Uh, as I understand it, the souls who are involved in those conflicts, they're playing out ancient conflicts that were not resolved lovingly in past lives. And the intention, the hope is that they'll resolve them lovingly this time around.
Well, it has to be. Actually, that's the story of Ishmael and Isaac and Ishmael going on right now. That's like 3,000 years old story, even longer than that. It's a lot of work to get around to resolution here, but hopefully resolution is happening.
You know, in my books, there's one of the main contributors is an ascended master who uses the name Aaron, which was his name in his last incarnation, which actually was with Jesus. And Aaron says, and I'm quoting now, you do not come into the incarnation for comfort or convenience. And that is most certainly true.
Yeah, I think a lot of us feel like, how the hell did I get here? What am I doing here? And why have I got to put up with whatever it is that I'm putting up with, a difficult relationship, for example? And yet here we are. It's helpful to know what you know in terms of, well, let me be responsible here at least so that I can see my way through as clearly as possible without falling into greater insanity. Right?
Yeah, and a big part of being responsible means pulling yourself out of victim consciousness if that's where you are,
Right.
without shame, without self-judgment, but recognizing if you are in victim consciousness, that's a very disempowered state.
Right.
It's hard to accomplish much from that state of consciousness. But if you come into the knowing that you are the courageous soul who planned your biggest challenges, well, then you know you're no longer a victim.
Hmm. That's such a central concept in the Course in Miracles. Lesson 31 is, I'm not a victim of the world I see. Boy, oh boy, but if you really get that, I mean, if you really see that, I think you're going a long ways in terms of understanding the Course, especially when you're going through something that looks like you're a victim.
Right.
You got a disease, for example, or a bad marriage or a difficult job or whatever it is.
Another thing I'll say to explain why we plan these challenges before we come here, our perspective is very different when we're back on the other side.
Yeah.
One of the main differences is that when you're on the other side, you know that an incarnation on Earth is actually very brief. It's here and it's gone like a clap of thunder. Now, obviously, it doesn't feel that way when you're here, especially if you're suffering. But from the non physical vantage point, you know that it's very brief. You also know that nobody is permanently harmed by anything that happens here. And you also know that the wisdom will become yours literally for all eternity. So, from that perspective, that a lifetime is very brief, no one is permanently harmed, the wisdom becomes part of you for all eternity. From that perspective, it does make sense that some souls, not all, but some, would plan very big challenges.
Right. I go back to Shakespeare's out brief candle, life support player, struts and frets. I turned 80 this last year. When you turn 80, there's something different. I don't know how to explain it. When you get the oxygen, wait a minute. You got what, maybe 10 more years max? Maybe, and if you get past that, what kind of shape you're going to be in? So you have this sense of it's coming to fruition. And maybe I should get my act together. If I haven't got it together before, I better do it now.
Right.
Um,
Speaking of Shakespeare, here's an interesting factoid for you. It's my understanding that Shakespeare was an incarnation of the ascended master Saint Germain.
oh,
And speaking of pre-birth planning, the reason Saint Germain chose the name William Shakespeare is because it stands for the will of the I am presence to shake a spear at humanity's darkness.
really?
Yeah.
That's an interesting piece of information. So, are you more content now in knowing that you chose this and that you're happily waking up in the journey?
I am more content. I mean, the life that I had in the corporate world before I started down this path and the life that I have now are so completely different. And in that one, I just felt lost. I felt that if I fall off the face of the earth, it's not going to make any difference to anybody. And now I'm doing work where I know that I'm making a positive difference in people's lives, and it's just deeply, deeply fulfilling.
What do you say to? I talked to a friend about your book who said, this is a criticism, not of you, but of the whole process, that he thought that these other lives were just fantasies. They were just made up. They're other dreams, and they weren't in any way connected to the whole of reality. You got a response to that?
My response to that is that if somebody planned before they were born to be skeptical about pre birth planning, then that path is perfect for them. And I don't want to say anything to pull them off it.
Okay. I guess that's a good answer to that particular question. Well, what is it? What do we need to be doing in terms of waking up ourselves? What do you see I see a lot of people going to sleep. By going to sleep, I mean, especially my age. By that, I mean, as you get older, there's this tendency, I think, to kind of give up, to kind of just, okay, I'll give me something else to eat and pour me another glass of wine and turn on the TV and uh, see you on the other side. I don't know how else to explain it other than just really waking up once and for all. Get this body healthy, get this mind working correctly, and get these relationships working out smoothly. Well,
Well, I've been saying for many years now, I believe that the combination of prayer and meditation will take anybody about 80% of where they want to go. The other 20% will be unique to each individual, and each person will have to figure out what that is for themselves. But if to answer your question, if somebody wants to awaken or awaken more fully, more
yeah,
deeply,
right. That's what I
I,
meant.
I would start with prayer It doesn't make any sense at all to want to awaken deeply and not ask the universe to assist you in doing that. And then I would add regular meditation to that. It doesn't have to be anything fancy or effortful. Just sit for 20 minutes a day, 6 or 7 days a week. Rest in the presence of God. Just set that intention to rest in the presence of God. There is benefit to every meditation without exception. Even if you can't identify what the benefit is, there's still benefit.
What do you mean by prayer then? It,
Prayer, in my view, is speaking with God or with a higher power, if you don't want to use the word God. And meditation is more listening.
so prayer is getting into dialogue?
It certainly can be.
Right. But well, you got to feel like you're giving and there's a give and take there, I think. Right.
Sure, but I think what happens for a lot of people, when you try to talk to God or talk to your spirit guides, there's a natural human tendency to want to hear words as a
Right.
response.
Yeah, yeah.
You want to hear a big booming voice in the room, or second to that, a booming voice in your head. And that can happen. It does happen for some people,
Occasionally, yeah.
but it's an unusual experience. Usually, the answer is going to come a little bit later in time, and it's going to come in a way that is not so easy to recognize. Spirit works through other people. So somebody will show up in your life at just the right moment and say just the right thing. And unless you're very, very observant, you could miss it completely, or you could notice the significance, but it may not occur to you that this person has been sent by a higher power.
Hmm. So what are you looking at for Rob Schwartz for the next decade or so? How are you gonna just keep diving? And
Well, in terms of the work, I'm working on a fourth book now that will be about the pre-birth planning of large-scale events. And my own personal spiritual path is moving in a non-dual direction. So, when you talk about waking up more fully, that's very much my intention.
so that's the other thing too, is that somebody else brought up the question of in terms of non-dualism, this life has a story, and it seems as though we kind of go from story to story to story to story. What happens if the story ends? I mean, does the story, no, I don't mean in terms of our losing our spirit, but do I need to keep doing this game over and over again, or can I just be at home with God and uh, pure love, so to speak?
Well, that's essentially the non-dual path. You
That's what I
can,
meant. Yeah.
yeah, you can do that uh, while you're in a body. You can do that while you're not in a body. And that's the general direction that humanity is headed. When you talk about the story ending, that's the evolutionary path for humanity. Eventually, the human brain, as I understand it, will evolve to a point where when things happen in the external world, seemingly external world, they'll still be experienced as pleasurable or unpleasant, but there won't be a story manufactured by the mind around those things. So, for example, I have an acquaintance who is quite far along a non-dual path. That's his state of consciousness all the time now. He's, I'm going to guess, in his 60s. And several years ago, his son died. His son was in his 30s.
Oh,
And my friend told me that after his son died, there was deep, deep grief, but
oh,
no suffering, no
oh,
suffering, because he wasn't telling himself a story about his son's death. It was
oh.
just the pure, raw experience of grief with no story at all.
Hmm. That makes sense. Last couple of weeks ago, we had on Keith Kavanaugh, who was deep into the Course of Miracles, and he had an 8 year period of like being in misery, of depression, and all that sort of stuff, which he came out of, and as he came out of it, it seemed like he had a really clear mystical experience, which was ongoing. By ongoing, I mean he's walking around for days, and I think it's sort of stuck with him, just loving the heck out of everything. I mean, just nothing but love coming here from there. And that's all it is. It's just giving that now. And I think that's where Jesus was.
I would imagine that is certainly true.
Yeah. That's so this Jesus has got a story, but it's not what can I say, an intentional story. I mean, if you are who you are and you're living in if you're an enlightened being living in a false society, that society is going to have a response to you. Do you see what I'm saying? In terms of Jesus,
Absolutely.
the people loved him, but the authorities hated him.
Speaking of Jesus, to tie this in with pre-birth planning, it's my understanding that what Judas did, that was his pre-birth arrangement with Jesus.
Oh
And
yeah,
it's also my understanding that the reason Jesus chose Judas to play that role is that he knew he could trust him to play it just as he wanted it to be
right,
played.
right.
So when we leave a physical incarnation, when we first get back to the other side, the memory of the pre-birth plan doesn't return fully, completely, all at once. It comes back slowly in stages. So, as I understand it, when Judas first got back to the other side after that lifetime, he didn't remember that he had planned to do what he did. He just
No,
knew what he'd done and was just overcome with, with remorse and guilt. And then through a number of conversations with Jesus, in which it was clear to him that they had planned this together and that he was forgiven, that there was actually nothing to forgive him for, then
right.
he was able to get to a place of peace and self-forgiveness.
Actually, it says in the Course in Miracles very directly, it says, Jesus speaking, Judas is my brother, as much a part of the sonship as you are or I am.
No,
It's unlikely that I would have condemned him. That goes right along with when he was just playing his part,
playing his part. That's right.
yeah, doing what he's supposed to do. Well, we've been going on for 50 minutes. Day goes quick, doesn't
It does go quick.
it? And usually at this point, Bud will share with us a little bit about what's been happening in the chat. Bud, you want to come on and do that?
We just have one question in chat, and we have two
Okay.
people obviously with their hands raised.
Okay, very good.
John Sunday's asking, what top three qualities are best developed to access our divine consciousness? So three qualities.
When we do the divine virtues exercise in my 2-day workshop, there are now 28, either 28 or 29 virtues on the list. And the way I developed that list, so I listened to many, many people's conversations in their pre-birth planning sessions. And over a period of time, I made an observation, which was when they were planning their biggest challenges, a lot of times the conversation revolved around the desire to cultivate these qualities that are very important at the soul level. And so I started putting together a list of the ones that came up in the pre-birth planning sessions. And that list is the list we work with in the divine virtues exercise. I can't pick out three or so and say these are more important than any of the other virtues. What I can tell you is that the average person is working on two or three in a lifetime. Occasionally, somebody is working on four or five. Usually, the person, not usually, almost always, the person working on four or five has a life filled with trauma. As far as I know, nobody is working on more than five virtues in a lifetime. That would be too much for anybody to take on. There's also an interesting phenomenon in which when you cultivate a certain virtue, it leads very easily and almost effortlessly to the cultivation of certain other virtues. So unconditional love is a big one there. If you can successfully cultivate unconditional love, it will transform into other things like peace and joy and so forth.
Hmm. Yeah, it's in the Course in Miracles does describe 10 characteristics of a teacher of God. And those 10 characteristics are really kind of virtues, honesty, patience, that kind of thing. And it does say that there is actually an order to them. There's a reason why 1 is 1 and 10 is 10. as a developmental priority. It'd be interesting to see your list up against those 10 and kind of compare the process there. Doug Fishman is on. He just wrote at the bottom of the screen, trust. Trust is numero uno. We're trusting that there is a God, first of all, and that God's in charge and knows what's right for us. All right. Very good. All right, thanks. Well, I got see some friends that are lined up here with questions. Hannah, you want to get us started?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for your fabulous insights. I have two questions. One is love basically a state of consciousness or feeling? Somebody said to me, I truly love you, but I don't feel it. So that's one of the questions. And I answered, well, love is a state of consciousness. But then I said, no, because some people I feel the love, I feel the not being in love, but the love, the complete acceptance, etc. The people I have that state of consciousness of love, but there is no experience of that. That's one of them. That's one of the questions. And the other question is, I have been working for 16 and a half years with a patient of mine who I've seen pro bono. She's a widow and had two young children when her husband died. And that's when I started working with her pro bono, because I had worked with her before. She struggles with money and had a breast cancer, terrible. And less than 2 years later, she's got another cancer where she had quarter of her body taken out. So how can I help her more than I go with the process with her?
To your first question, I would say that love is a vibration, a frequency. And in terms of the person you're helping, first, let her know that in my third book, which is called Your Soul's Love, there's an entire chapter about a phenomenon called interdimensional parenting. Interdimensional parenting happens when there's a pre-birth plan for one of the two parents to die, and then help the parent who remains in body from the other side to raise the child or children. And that's the case in the story that I explore in that chapter. It's about a woman whose husband, they have a son, and then shortly after the son is born, the husband is killed in a plane crash. And he comes to his wife in his spirit body, his astral body, and tells her, this is our pre-birth plan. I'm going to help you from the other side to raise our son. And we go on in the channeling session we're actually talking with Jesus in that channeling session. And he explains in great detail why couples engage in interdimensional parenting. It's a very, very difficult life plan, but there are tremendous advantages to all involved in doing this if they're willing to do it.
And the name of the book is
Your Soul's Love.
Thank you so much.
Alice. Hi, Alice.
Yeah, it's been an emotional it's been emotional some time. My older sister passed away 2 weeks ago.
Oh, boy.
And it was been wrenching the last few years. In her illness, she pulled away and didn't want to see me. And it was just heart-wrenching to me. And there are other dynamics going on with my other older sister, trying to be control drama and put wedges between us. So it's been really heart-wrenching. But then when she passed 2 weeks ago, she lost an ability to speak at the end, not just walk, and was on a feeding tube and under caregivers 2 hours away from me in Virginia. But she lost ability to speak. So I was just relying on typed messages. And, I'd wait on the next one, when I'd finally hear from her again. And so when she passed, the first thing I realized is she could hear me because I'm a psychic medium, She was like, you can hear me? I said, yes, I can hear you. And she was like shocked and delighted. And we've been working through all kind of emotional stuff. Let me tell you, deep grieving, but also, pain of just dynamics within us as sisters. So I've been asking my guide, Jesus, is of course my main teacher, in the course, as to how much we can continue to grow together, not just closely, because now I feel closer to her than I have in years, because she was pushing me away. And can she continue to grow in spirit, even though she actually became more atheistic and declared that actually last year to me more directly, and I should get over it, you know. But then I emailed her back that, you know, I've had certainly a different path than you, but being raised Unitarian Universalist, we're taught tolerance. So I'm accepting where you are, including that our other sister went on a path of Wiccan, spells and curses and control dramas with narcissistic personality disorder. You know, it's like there was all this stuff that's come up that we've been working through the last 2 weeks emotionally, but I've been very blessed with feeling her presence. In fact, you know, I did automatic writing like 35 years ago, and she's wanting to write through me. Like, I was like, oh my God, I have this ability. I haven't used it in 30 some years. Is there no other way for me to be communicating with her? And I keep asking my guides and teachers, how can we both keep growing, even though she's not in a body right now? You know, and I'm certainly know the importance of unlearning my ego. How can I help her so she doesn't have to wait for another incarnation and continue to work through what's, you know, with our family dynamics as a way of helping that?
Alice, one of the things that often happens in a between life soul regression, which can be done either in a workshop as part of a group or in a private session, is that when you're in the trance state in hypnosis, you have the opportunity, you can ask your counselor to call in any loved ones on the other side that you would like to speak to.
I don't have to go in a trance. I've never needed a trance as a medium. I don't need a trance. They're there all the time. I can call them in at any point. So the fact that I'm working with her right now in the moment, it's extraordinary to me, but I also want to do the best I can of helping her
So when you
continue
ask
to
her,
grow, you know,
when you
continue to
ask her how
grow.
you can help her to grow, what does she tell you?
Well, we've been definitely working on stuff together, you know, this control dramas with my other sister, and why she pulled away, and, you know, what her situation was with her illness. And so, you know, I'm extremely clairaudient, so we've been talking a lot. But she was very quiet and more private, so I'm kind of trying to be sensitive to that too, that this is not a comfort level for her to sort of open. She calls me a gusher now, in spirit, but you know, it's like I'm very much emoting and trying to work on my thoughts and feelings. So again, I've never been in trance. I don't need trance to access that. So I feel blessed that I don't need that to have that kind of a direct experiences. John's read my books that I've never gotten published, but about my experiences of getting guidance for decades now. But I just want to be the best I can to help her, and want to know how long we can continue to work in spirit without her having to reincarnate, to continue to work through this, so that she doesn't have to do pre-birth planning. We're doing all the planning right now, working together. We're working through whatever we need to work through. And John, I don't know if we want to address and answer a question on that too, as a core student, you know, how do you continue to do the work when you're not in bodies, basically? And I'm not a body. I know I'm not a body. I've had too many out-of-body experiences to know I'm not a body. You're muted, John.
Yeah, I said, you don't have a body, but you got a mind.
Yeah, that's true.
And the mind is the thing that keeps going, you know?
Yeah.
Rob, you want to address that, or?
Well, I mean, if Alice is already having a clairaudient communication with her, that's the foundation. Just keep asking, stating your intention to help her and work with her, and let her guide you with that.
Actually, she hasn't moved to the role of guiding me. She's just been helping me with both of us process. But she says she'd like to write through me, so I don't know what that means. This is new to me, other than that I've had experience years ago doing automatic writing. My handwriting changed into her handwriting yesterday, which was a very interesting experience.
Go ahead, find out.
Yeah.
Huh.
I think maybe she'll help me finally finish these books, John. I don't know. She was not a writer. She was an accountant. She was an accountant.
You can still talk.
Yeah, she's blessed that she can talk. She's blessed. She feels grateful to be rid of that body. She came to me in my dream the morning before, and gave me a big hug. So I felt, you know, like blessed with that experience too. And she holds my hand. I can feel her holding my hand, which is wonderful experience.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Alice. Let's go to Marilyn. Marilyn?
Okay.
I just wanted to bring up a couple of things. One reason I was really interested in this presentation was in the 70s. I was very much into New Age things, and I'd gone to this workshop on past life regressions. And as I was being regressed, I ended up between lives instead of a past life. And it's not what I intended. So this really validates for me what you're saying. Let me see. So fast forward, this would be like 2005. And I was having coffee with a friend, and she was telling me about this job. And I don't usually feel this, but she was talking about a friend that she wanted to give this to. And I started to feel really envious, like I want this job. And she stopped and said, "It's for you." And so I went up. It was volunteer in the beginning, and it was at a center for people with cancer with complementary care. It was out in the woods. It was just what I had like dreamed of, actually. And I started running a group in 2005, and then founded another one in my practice with people who had metastatic cancer, because I was really drawn to working with people who had trauma. So I did both of those for about 10 years, ended around 2015. And 1 year later, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Fortunately, it was only stage 1. And then in 2019, again, but it was only stage 1. So I didn't really feel like suffering or anything, because I'm thinking it's not like the women I've dealt with. And I actually, probably right after that time, went to a medium for my younger son, whom I'm really close with. And I had hoping that she'd give me information on this. And what happened, she started to tell me about, there's a group here, there's a woman named Sue. And I remembered Sue was in my group. I mean, all the women except one ended up passing away over time. And Sue was there with the group that had passed. And she said, "We're working on this side while you're working on that side." And I had this deep feeling of this was my calling. And, it really resonated with, I would leave group at times and go over the side of the road and just cry out with joy. So I knew it was my calling. So little over a year ago, this son that I feel really close with was diagnosed with cancer at age 35 and had to go through a really difficult surgery where he could have died. It was within his heart and other things. And we thought he made it through the surgery, and we thought everything was going to be, he went back to work actually in the beginning of December. And then in this past January, he had a seizure, and the cancer had spread to his brain. And basically, I didn't want to say the M word, but it had metastasized. And I mean, there was a point where I prayed harder than I had ever prayed in my life before that surgery. And what I finally reached in that prayer was a sense of peace. And I realized that that's all I want in my life is peace, pure, not attached to anything, just peace.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably what I needed to realize. We're still dealing with the cancer. I cannot believe the positive attitude he has. He's not involved in any spiritual path, at least, intentionally or earth type. But he has talked to me twice, and second time was, "Mom, I'm going to die." And I talked with him for an hour on the phone, and we visited him next day, and he was back again to saying, "I can't go to that dark place." and he's just going ahead, and it's an inspiration to my husband and myself. I don't know. I was going to say, I don't know where he comes from, but we must have made a contract with each other. So those are a few things. Oh, by the way, when I had that experience with the past life regression, it's interesting because I had this feeling I was lying down, and at the head of the table was this very wise man. I felt like he was my real father. He had long beard and, you know, that kind of archetype. And I was surrounded by other beings, and they showed me the earth, and I saw my mother and father, and I went, oh, they're so young. They married right out of high school. So that's the whole story. And I wanted to, that's where my interest comes in this, and how I've found so many things that the Course teaches in my life, and not wanting the New Age magic anymore, just wanting peace.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I would say, you know, the experience with your son is certainly part of your pre-birth plans. That doesn't mean that it was planned as a certainty. There aren't actually many things that are planned as certainties. Most things are planned as possibilities or probabilities, sometimes very high probabilities. But so my wife is a channel, and she channels a collective, a group consciousness that we call the beings of light. And the metaphor they use for pre-birth planning, say, imagine you have a stack of sheets of paper in front of you.
Okay.
Every individual sheet is a complete set of pre-birth plans. So every person has their own stack, and each sheet varies according to vibration. The ones at the top are the highest vibration. That's where the learning is done through love, peace, and joy. Ones at the bottom are the lowest vibration. That's where the learning is done through pain and suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So all the time, everybody is moving up and down in their own individual stack of sheets of paper, depending upon the vibration they're at. That's the quantum explanation for pre-birth planning.
Yeah, you know, I found before he was diagnosed, I was really on track with the Course, to the point that I was automatically knowing when thoughts were of the ego, and just switching over. I mean, my practice was really, I was perfecting it in terms of not being in the ego. And after he was diagnosed, little by little over the past year, I sort of lost that practice, but I haven't lost a sense that this is for a purpose. And I haven't forgotten what the Course is teaching me. It's just that I have trouble at times being in the practice like I was before.
Sure. Thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob, too, very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Jim?
Hi there. Rob, appreciate your wisdom here and sharing. I have read your second book based on an interview John had with a woman who had gone to the other side, and it's all about how she chose her next lifetime. And so I do believe in all that. In fact, quickly, just a review of my situation. In the 80s, I was told by a channel that I had a lot of fear to heal in this lifetime based on two really traumatic deaths. And later I was on a massage table with a woman who spoke to angels, and I mentioned that, and she said, well, I can tell you what those deaths were. And the first one was so significant. It felt so true. It was like ancient Egypt time, and where I was actually born, put into a tomb alive with the Pharaoh, because it was an honor for me to do that. And all of the fears that I felt during that image of being there were the same fears that I felt when I was I joined my parents and my family as a child and realized that it was really traumatic and I didn't want to be there. And at about age 3, I wanted to go home. And I obviously stayed and have been living through that trauma that brought up all of those same fears. And I understand and do believe that it was a matter of pre-birth planning where I chose that family, ideally a narcissistic father and an uncaring kind of mother, not because she wasn't uncaring, she just didn't know how to be caring. So I chose that to re-experience all these same fears that I had been going through. So I've done some trauma work, but nonetheless, there's this one level of suffering and this other track of spirituality, Course in Miracles, and especially recently deep into non-dualism. And it's the only time I really feel peace, when I can listen to a channel, or I'm sorry, a teacher. There's certain ones in India that just put me into a peace and calm. So, but basically my question is, so in my conscious life, feeling this suffering that is pervasive, of course, I want it to go away. It doesn't seem to go away. So the question is, how do you live with that while you're managing to go through life and do the spiritual work? I will say that for the last 4 weeks, I've been going through COVID, which I never had before, and it was very difficult. And I can't seem to shake the tiredness and the exhaustion that I had even before COVID. And I'm thinking that this is part of the healing process, hopefully, but it just, it doesn't seem to be leaving. And all I can fantasize with is a warm beach on Little Dick's Bay in the Virgin Islands or something, just to lie there and experience that calm and rest and peace. But do you have any suggestions for handling the suffering while we haven't completed it in the lifetime? I will say that I was in a workshop a number of years ago where the leader said, bring your parents up before you. And all of a sudden they popped up. And they were two very different people, very realized. They were loving to each other in a way that they had no consciousness of before. And later, my brother, who died at age 31, he popped up there too. So there were the three of them kind of completing the family, except for my sister, who's still alive. And so I'm aware of what's going on, but I'm not able to shake, so to speak, or complete the healing of the suffering and the pain. So looking for any thoughts and suggestions you might have for doing it, living with it while continuing to, move through it, and non-dualism.
Yeah, I have a few ideas. When suffering lingers like that, it's generally because the individual is in some degree of aversion to the suffering, which is completely human and completely natural. But energetically, aversion is sticky. Whatever you go into aversion to, then you're keeping it around. You're not actually pushing it away. So the thing to do, if you can get yourself to do it, when the suffering arises, you might just sit down and meditate on the suffering and invite it to be with you. Say yes to it. Yes opens the door for it to eventually leave. Just welcome it in, sit with it, let yourself feel everything that arises, not as a kind of special exercise where you try to call up the suffering, but when it hits, instead of distracting yourself, which is what most people do, sit down and just be with it and let yourself feel it fully without going into aversion, at least as much as you can manage it. There are now many somatic types of therapies for getting trauma that's lodged in the body to release. There's one actually called somatic experiencing, and there are many variations on that. You might want to do some reading about that. And then the other idea that comes to mind, if you feel that you have any degree of PTSD from your experiences, you might want to read up on, there's an organization called MAPS, which is maps.org. And they are in stage 3 clinical trials. They're using a substance called MDMA to treat PTSD in combat veterans. And they're getting a success rate of 70%, which is astounding. It's going to be legalized within the next year or two. And you'll start to see all these articles about MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. Keep an eye on what's happening in that space. That is a very promising treatment.
Yeah, I have been following them a little bit, and ever since the study came out at Johns Hopkins with psilocybin, it's like, and that was maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. It's like, yeah, I want to have that experience, and yet it's not yet available to regular people like me. Not in a study, but I will. Certainly keep my eyes and ears open for MDMA, and appreciate that. I do have a resistance and aversion to feelings. I've had that all my life. So when I finally get there, it does help. I haven't done it with this particular suffering, so I appreciate that suggestion, and we'll follow up with that.
Yeah.
Thanks, John.
All right, thank you. Thank you both.
You're welcome.
Okay, we got 2 more, and then we'll probably be toward our end. Catherine?
Hi there. Thank you, John. Thank you, Rob. Yeah, I've held the belief that I chose this life before I came for a long time now, but interestingly, haven't really attended any talk which spoke of it. And yeah, I came today and was just getting loads of tingles as you spoke, not even specifically about it. I was just feeling I was in the right place, so thank you. I became disabled at age 23 with what was diagnosed as chronic fatigue syndrome, and just ended up in an upstairs room with not enough to eat, and nobody stepped forward to help. So I found myself for most of my life in this situation where I can't rest sufficiently to manage the illness I have. And then at one point I had quite a miracle, and I had a couple of years of walking around more, and then yeah, just a whole load of circumstances put me back at a lower level. So I am back to, I had to be fed for 14 years and couldn't speak much at all. But now I'm at the level where, like, getting to the kitchen and getting my own food is difficult. So I'm back at that kind of survival level. Yeah, I don't know if I needed to say that, but thank you for listening. And I guess my question is, if I didn't believe I'd chosen it, I would be finding it so much harder. But I know I'd still blame myself for my suffering. And A Course in Miracles community is actually quite a good place to find projections for blame for suffering. I find, like, this idea that if we were really on our path, we'd be feeling just things would be much easier now. So I've had continued guidance since I was 23, and it became far more powerful once I became ill. It's non-stop, so I always feel I'm learning. And one of my practices is to say yes to what comes up, but there's certainly still an element of me saying, why is this happening? And no, and an element of shaming myself, as if I was more enlightened, I would be having an easier time. So I just wonder if you might recommend a particular book, one of your 3 books, or speak more about the workshop, or anything you had to say would be gratefully received. Thank you.
Well, that's a very courageous pre-birth plan that you have there. I would say read at least the physical illness chapter in the first book, which is Your Soul's Plan. It's a very different story. It's about a soul who plans to have the AIDS virus. but I think there may be things in there that can be very helpful to you. Also, I would encourage you to do a between lives soul regression. If you go into trance, which is not something I can absolutely guarantee, although the odds are very much in your favor, but if you go into trance, either in a private session or in the group workshop, you can ask your counsel any questions you have at all about why this experience has been happening, how to best respond to it, what you're supposed to learn from it, literally any question that comes to mind. If you feel that the cost of the workshop is too much for you, we don't turn anybody away for financial reasons. So just write to me through the website, which is yoursoulsplan.com. Tell me that, and I'll make the arrangements for you.
Thank you very much. And in terms of the book, I almost feel that the experience of abandonment and lack of support seems to be the bigger theme for me. I always feel like I got illness because I needed the other part of it. Like maybe that's what I signed up. So is that a theme of any particular chapter in one of your books?
It's not the focus, but it certainly comes up here and there in a number of different chapters. I would take a look at the other two books as well, Your Soul's Gift and Your Soul's Love.
Thank you.
You're
God
welcome.
bless.
Lynn, I think you're going to sign us off, and as long as you're on, you might as well do the prayer for us at the end.
With pleasure. Namaste, mighty companions. John, Rob, thank you, thank you, thank you, everybody. Jim, I've been suicidal most of my life, and I live in gratitude now, but it still comes up, but it doesn't scare me anymore. I try to take it as an opportunity to remember who I really am. And as far as purification, I have a poem I wrote in 2020 I'd like to read.
Go ahead.
I call it Only One. Pandemic fear connects our flesh in warm weather's toxic chill. Long-held bile excretes itself. We share the mud of intense vomit. Fill your nose to filter breath as essence purifies our collective. Camouflage fades in love remembered. Joy knows no pain, just who is.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you.
You. Thank you.
We usually close with the Lord's Prayer from the Course in Miracles. And I'm going to ask Lynn to read them. I can put it on screen so everybody can see it. Rob, if you don't mind hanging on just for a couple more minutes so we can say goodbye properly.
Sure.
All right. There we go, Lynn. Go ahead.
The Lord's Prayer from A Course in Miracles. Forgive us our illusions, Father, and help us to accept our true relationship with you, in which there are no illusions and where none can ever enter. Our holiness is yours. What can there be in us that needs forgiveness when yours is perfect? The sleep of forgetfulness is only the unwillingness to remember your forgiveness and your love. Let us not wander into temptation, for the temptation of the Son of God is not your will. And let us receive only what you have given and accept but this into the minds which you created and which you love. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, honey. Thank you all for being here, and I hope to see some more of you at one of our future Sunday with Mondays. And Rob, a very, very big thank you for being present and sharing your immense amount of wisdom and work that you've been doing. And it'd be nice to see you again at some other future date.